we live now? We should be. Just check with Sandra. So we haven't got everybody back into the room that should be here yet, but I hope everybody that's online and who has had the advantage of having their lunch at home with us. And I'll just get Sandra to do a quick roll call to see that we've got most of us here. Sandra.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Kia ora.
Councillor Collins.
Hey, Sandra.
Councillor Coombe.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dalton. Councillor Darby is not here. Councillor Filipaina.
Yes, just finished my salad.
And the sausage rolls, Alf, come on.
Councillor Fletcher.
I heard you guys had some.
Ni hao.
Councillor Henderson.
Hello.
Councillor Hills. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers.
There, you got one.
Councillor Simpson.
I'm here.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Present.
Councillor Young.
Good afternoon. 大家好.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, councillors. And the ones that are missing will be with us very shortly. The next item on the agenda is the Memorandum of Understanding between Auckland Council and the Hamilton City Council. And I'll just double check that our Chief of Strategy, Megan Tyler, is on the line. Are you with us, Megan?
I am, thank you, Meg.
Okay. I'm going to move this one before inviting you to speak to it, and maybe Councillor Mulholland, would you like to second it? Oh, sorry, I'm picking on the girl from the Waikato. So, okay, are you with us, Councillor Mulholland? Okay, so it sounds like it's Councillor Josephine Bartley that will second that, and. Megan, I'll just ask you to speak to the paper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, kia ora koutou. Look, I'll just be very brief. This really came out of the water discussions that have been happening over the last couple of months and that you've referenced in your previous item. And the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Cooper in particular had a meeting with Hamilton City Council and their counterparts, including Mayor Southgate. And it was agreed that there needs to be perhaps more formality around a strategic relationship between Auckland Council and Hamilton City Council. And so this is the result of that. So staff, myself and my counterpart at Hamilton City Council have put together this agreement at Attachment 1. It doesn't negate any of our own jurisdiction, regulatory requirements, anything like that. It really is a relationship agreement, an opportunity at both the political and staff level to work together in a different way, whether that's an advocacy or doing joint programs or whatever that might be. So look, I'm going to leave it there, Mr. Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Megan. This has been circulated to all of our members of the governing body, and I haven't had any dissent or any questions received back around it. It is an expression of good faith to the Hamilton City Council, both through their cooperation with us in terms of providing their water allocation consent for us to use in the interim, but also because we're two cities that are neighbouring cities and have quite a lot in common. So I'll take questions and comments together, I think, at this stage, if there are any. maybe we can get through this item quite quickly. If there's anybody wishing to ask a question or make a comment, if you could indicate to us now. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Very briefly, great memorandum, excellent work, Megan. Thank you very much. And I just think it's a great acknowledgement of where we've got to collectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's no indication of anybody else wanting to speak or comment on this. Just to say that when we do have our meetings on a 6-monthly basis, any councillor would be welcome to join us. And I know Councillor Tracy Mulholland has indicated a particular interest in it, and maybe Councillor Josephine Bartley. So we'll advertise when the meetings are happening. One will be in Hamilton, one will be in Auckland, and if necessary we could do it by Zoom. But I think it is a step in the right direction in building that sister city relationship that should exist between two of the fastest growing cities in the country. Councillor Cooper, you were wanting to take a call on it.
Thank you. Just briefly, Mr. Chair, is something you said before about good faith around restrictions? I think it was you.
That's correct.
Even though it's not in this document, the intent is a good faith agreement, and that I know that's been articulated verbally in the discussions that Hamilton people would not expect to be having restrictions when we didn't. And I just think we need to remember that when we're all voting for this. So I think that's fair play.
Yeah, that's very much consistent with, I think, a lot of the comments around the table in the last debate, that actually, while we haven't had restrictions during summer, restrictions are the norm for many councils. And they're reasonably light restrictions in Hamilton's case, but they made it clear to us that it wouldn't be an acceptable look for them to give us their water consent only to find that their people were on constraints and we weren't. So I think that's a point well made, and their constraints, as we saw in the last paper, are reasonably light constraints, but common sense constraints at a time when water demand is very high over the summer. Okay, there's no further questions or comments. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. Thank you very much, Megan. Item number 11, sorry, that did not overlook this one. It's an important one. Relates to the independent review of Ports of Auckland, the health and safety situation on the waterfront that we have discussed in other forums. So I'm welcoming to the table Phil Wilson, Governance Director, and Bram Van Mel, Manager of our Projects and Transactions from our legal team, and also online, excuse me, Sarah Holdham. So for the sake of putting it on the record, I will move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Shane Henderson. Sorry, actually, Councillor Casey. Yeah.
Thank you.
We've got gender balance in the mover and the seconder now, which we wouldn't have had with you, Councillor Henderson. So, Phil, I'll ask you to speak to the paper first, or are you deferring to Bram?
I'll speak to it, Your Worship. Firstly, can I just acknowledge for councillors the lateness in getting this to you? It's been work done under some time pressure, and if I might, particular thanks to Sarah and Bram and Alistair for doing that. Obviously, we needed, in commissioning this, we needed to make sure that the review was framed in the right way, that we were avoiding duplication of roles that others have. Maritime New Zealand in particular WorkSafe, they have jurisdictions for investigation in this space, so we needed to be careful not to be duplicating or complicating matters in terms of their work. We needed to consult Ports of Auckland, which has happened in the course of developing this, and of course there was some liaison with some experts and legal advice and such. Well, I'll let the paper speak for itself. just to say that our advice and the terms of reference, I think, are appropriately framed. As a public shareholder, you know, you need to have satisfaction that your company has the right systemic approach to health and safety, the right culture, performance, accountability, disciplines, both at a management and, importantly, in terms of your relationship with the company at a governance level. That's the frame in which the terms of reference has been set. But of course, you're not responsible for specific operational matters or investigations that are the domain of those other folk, their jurisdictions. You will note a recommendation seeking a chief executive delegation to finalise arrangements with a reviewer in consultation with the mayor and deputy mayor. We have a bit of a chicken and egg situation here where it hasn't been possible to finalise an arrangement with a reviewer because, of course, they are fundamentally interested in the scope of work, the terms of reference. So we have some live discussions with people, but I thought, just to preempt questions, you should understand that the people we have shortlisted to consider for this work represent folk with, firstly, independent, you know, they have suitable independence, they have suitable credibility, leadership, governance, analytical skills, and to a question that was asked earlier, yes, health and safety experience, and where possible, some ports knowledge, because ports is a specific, has some specific characters that need to be considered here. Now, it's a big ask finding one person who has that breadth. So it is entirely possible we will have a lead person who has most of it and a mandate to engage with other experts who can complement their experience to arrive at the appropriate view. So, Your Worship, perhaps leave it there. And if there is a need to discuss further the selection of a reviewer, then perhaps given privacy considerations in a public forum, we could do that afterwards.
Thank you very much, Phil. Councillors will see on their screens that there is a further recommendation added C to agree to include in the terms of reference that the review should consider the adequacy of incident reporting, investigation and implementation of suggested improvements. I'm advised by our legal advisor that's consistent with what the review is doing. It was the submission given to us this morning expressed a desire that we should be explicit about it, and a number of councillors, Councillors Coombe and Henderson and Casey and Bartley, have all indicated that would be their desire to see it put explicitly in that way in the recommendations. So I'll take questions separately on this. The first question is from Councillor Kathy Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And Phil, I've got two questions, really, just bear with me. The first is I'm really pleased to see C and the adequacy of incident reporting. When the Maritime Union supported our independent review on the 15th of September, they put out a media statement. In that media statement, they said, and I quote, "For every death or injury, there are several more near misses, many of which are not reported." Now, can I just ask you, at Auckland Council, you use the word culture. We have a culture that encourages people to report near misses. Can you just tell me how we do that? I recall the when it came up. Can you just tell me how we do that as a council? How we get those reported?
Councillor, there's probably two aspects to the answer. One is, a culture's the product of the right messages being received from the leadership and from colleagues. So the simple encouragement of people to come forward and make sure they record incidents, near misses, accidents, injuries, and such like. That's it, so that it becomes the way we do things around here. The sort of slightly more systemic answer is that we have processes, templates, electronic systems to make that easy, and where we can collect it and make it visible, and which we can refer to ensure that, having reported things, they are followed up on. And this is, I would suggest, the aspect that this Part C is trying to get to, because we're doing a systemic review of aspects at the port, and we want to see that those systems are in place, that the disciplines are there.
Thanks, Phil. Just a supplementary to that, I'm interested in the use of the word culture. The way that you use it, I'll be interested to know what you exactly mean by it, but I've heard it used by ports, and I've heard it used by the Maritime Union. And in that same press release on the 15th of September, the Maritime Union talked about the relentless pressure for productivity. That relentless pressure for productivity comes from management. So tell me how you, when we're looking at culture, what is it that we're looking at?
In its widest sense, when we talk about organisation culture, we are talking about the social norms, the behaviours that are shared and are a pattern in the organisation. And that probably sounds a little lofty, but it is the definition that we start with when we're looking at questions of culture in an organisation. What are the cues from the leadership? What are the behaviours that we see for real, not just written down in policy documents and such like?
Great, it's an important job. My final question, if the Mayor will just indulge me. At Auckland Council, we are very proud with the relationship we have with our various unions. And I'm interested as to whether the relationship between Ports of Auckland and especially the Maritime Union is one that will be looked at in terms of how working together can bring about benefits and changes to culture.
My response would be that the reviewer has sufficient mandate through these terms of reference to look at that, to consider the dynamics in the workplace. It is and I think this is acknowledged in the report, the port company has a review itself underway to assess the extent of worker engagement and whether those relationships are working. That's really for them to speak to rather than me, but the reviewer has a mandate through these terms of reference to look at that.
Thanks very much, Phil.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just looking at the letter I received this morning from the Chief Executive of Maritime New Zealand, and in terms of parallel reviews that they're doing, the development of a New Zealand-wide port safety strategic plan to drive better health and safety outcomes for workers at the ports brings together employers, unions and regulators in what they call a collaborative tripartite partnership. So I think the unions, both in this review, the union will have full ability to make its submissions to the reviewer, but there is also other work going on in terms of health and safety at our ports that involve the unions as part of that tripartite partnership, and I think that's important. Councillor John Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to Phil Wilson. There's mention in our agenda item here about free and frank discussion and staff confidentiality. Are we going to be making any recommendations with respect of how that might be achieved, or is it going to be left up to the reviewer or reviewers? For instance, is there going to be the ability to have off-site venue available for people? Do we have a view on that, or is it going to be left entirely up to what a reviewer thinks appropriate?
Councillor, more the latter. We're providing the framework for the reviewer. They will guide the actual review work. It was important for us to, however, provide some framing of it so that the staff at the port, the management at the port, had confidence that they could have those discussions with the reviewer appropriately.
Okay, so I guess from my perspective, if you're going to the trouble and expense of a review such as being anticipated here, I think it's important that, you know, in the first instance, especially in the current economic climate, people are given the ability to input in a, you know, entirely non-threatening environment, and anyone in any workplace knows that if you're doing that within the confines of your own workplace, people often feel vulnerable. So I'm assuming that that's going to be taken into account by the reviewers here, and I say that particularly in respect of E and F that are in our recommendations to do with culture and engagement and industrial relations, which are, you know, are pretty broad areas when you think about it. So I think that if we're going to this trouble, just as we did with the CCO review, that it be as all encompassing as possible as far as the employees go, and also the management. So we're getting a balanced view, and that people really feel that they can speak honestly and truthfully, because that's going to be beneficial to all parties going forward. So I would just urge then that if we're in any communications with the reviewer, that should be top of mind, especially given the recommendations that are put up here and that we're approving today in terms of this, looking at culture and industrial relations a bit broader than just, you know, strictly speaking, the health and safety aspects too. There is inevitably a wider view that gets drawn into any type of investigation such as this.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. If you look at the terms of reference under 4G, it says the review should allow participants to provide information and comment anonymously and on a fully confidential basis. So what you've just said is absolutely essential to the direction that we're giving to the reviewer. So thank you for that. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Mayor. There was a statement from the union representative this morning that the port company or its governance board, or maybe even its chair, didn't overtly support this. But my understanding, Mayor, is there is support, and that was recorded in a Radio New Zealand statement that the chair, Liz Coote, did support this review.
Absolutely, that is the case, and the press statement that I put out had a quote from the chair of the board indicating her explicit support for the review, and I wouldn't have expected anything less.
Thank you. It's good to just clear that up. So just in terms of who is the owner of this work? So it's an independent review. We're drawing up the terms of reference. We've consulted the port company. The port company is paying for it. And then the findings are released publicly. And then there's another section that says they're reported to the council. Who is the owner?
Thank you, Councillor Darby. I'll just respond to that. To the points that the Mayor made earlier, I mean, fundamentally the board of the company is responsible for managing operations at the port. So the onus will shift to them to take these recommendations on board and make them real. For our part, the use we will get from this report is it informs our position as shareholder when we hold the company to account for its performance. So a further related work stream we'll look at is in the statement of corporate intent and the more detailed KPIs and more detailed reporting we want on health and safety outcomes in there. So that will be useful to us in that framework, and it will also be useful to us longer term because, of course, we appoint the directors and the board. So in a sense, it's a joint ownership, but we wear different hats, so we will take different things from it and use those in our respective roles.
If I might just add, the commitment was to consult the port in the commissioning of this review. It is council commissioning it. It is an independent review, however.
That's clear. And just one final question, Mayor, and that is often reports come in draft forms. I imagine that no one's going to see a draft review. It's going to be one paper that comes in and is released publicly and comes to council and the port company. No one's going to have an opportunity to see a review and maybe question paragraphs, etc.
Other than for fact checking and for natural justice purposes.
Okay, thank you.
So it'll be a little bit like our CCO review, where the panel didn't send the whole of the review report to every stakeholder, but they sent sections of the report as it pertained to that stakeholder to ensure that if they were quoted accurately and to ensure that our facts were correct. But this won't be subject to a veto or changes after the fact by any party, including ourselves. Okay, Councillor Pipacoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the speedy turnaround on this and progressing the review. I did give some feedback on the draft regarding, I think it was the review process 5B, and I was just concerned that it had the may in there about the reviewer may receive the contributions, and I just wondered if that might have come about because I just read it too quickly, but it might be picked up elsewhere. But I was just concerned whether that gave the reviewer the opportunity to exclude stakeholders from the review. So does that mean the reviewer could decide, for example, not to speak to a union representative? So I just wanted, it was some feedback that I gave when it was circulated, so I just wanted to close that off.
That's correct, Councillor Coombe. Yes, we'll tidy that up. It was may as an empowering may. They should be allowed to talk to everyone they need to, but we'll make it clear that we expect them to cover the ground in terms of the key stakeholders. Yep.
So how would that be altered? Does that get picked up in terms of minor changes?
It's a minor change that I'll convert it to a shall or something like that.
Thank you. That would be if the mayor and deputy mayor, I think it's, yeah, happy with that, with the minor changes.
Yep, that's no problem at all. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the report and the work on the terms of reference. I wanted to know, is there a way to get accountability from the governance and the leadership, not just in terms of their relationship between the board and senior managers, but between the board, senior managers and the rest of the workers? Like, is that something that can be included? And then, stevedores and lashes and everyone else. And then also, is there a way to get accountability back to their own health and safety policy, in particular, that they believe all injuries are preventable and that no business objective ought to take priority over health and safety? Like, is there a way we can get that accountability through this review to those points?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll answer the first part of that, and I'll just check with Sarah Holdham, who's on the line and who manages day-to-day aspects of this in terms of the accountability levers that apply. Just to forewarn you, Sarah, if you're online. But can I probably counsel people not to expand the scope of the review too widely into the broader industrial space. I think we would all understand that there is a nexus between relationships with the union health and safety practice, and I think that's the appropriate space for the review to look at. It is always a challenge, particularly in terms of the appetite of the governing body, to have a review reported back by the end of this calendar year. The broader we make this, the more questions we require of the reviewer to ask, the longer it will take and the bigger the piece of work is. The motivation for this I understood to be very clearly health and safety performance of the company, and yes, I would understand that it needs to contemplate industrial relations issues on there, but it's not fundamentally a review of industrial relations in the port company, I would suggest. But there were other aspects to your question. Sarah, do you wish to comment?
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, Phil. Hello, Councillor. Could you possibly just repeat that part of the question for me?
It was really about how do we get accountability through this review to the port's health and safety policy about all injuries being preventable and no business objective ought to take priority over health and safety.
I would answer that by saying I think that as with any aspect of their performance and their success as a company, and obviously health and safety is the most important, then it is about appropriate monitoring and essentially what Graham referred to earlier. So the two key levers we have are influencing the statement of corporate intent is one, and that's about setting those objectives. And two is appointing the board. So if we are not happy, or if you as councillors are not happy with the performance of the board, then there is the ability to kind of make changes to appointments. It is slightly complicated by the fact that appointments to the Ports Board are delegated to the Ports of Auckland Limited appointment panel. So it's not directly held by you or not directly by the appointments committee. So the statement of corporate intent and the appointments are the two key levers for influencing the performance of the board.
And if I can just add to that, the appointments, the Ports of Auckland appointments panel is made up of myself, the Chief Executive, and the Chair of the Ports of Auckland. So you can rest assured that one of the next appointments that are made to the board will be somebody that has a strong expertise in health and safety that will influence the way in which the board carries out its responsibility in that regard.
Thank you for that, Your Worship. Considering that there's already the chair of the District Health Board on the board, do we really think a health and safety person is going to make a difference as a board appointment?
Yes, if you look at the nature of the appointment that we may make, I think you will find that the credentials of one individual, at least on the board, will be impeccable in that respect.
Okay, thank you. I had one more question, please. I wanted to pick up on Councillor Casey. She was asking about culture, and I was thinking, shouldn't we not restrict the review to health and safety culture, but look at the culture of the whole Ports of Auckland, and in doing so, we'd be able to pick up health and safety culture?
Well, my advice is not to broaden it too much. What you have represented in the draft terms of reference is a focused piece of work on health and safety, motivated by the serious concerns for what's happened down at the port. It will have a look at broader culture questions, but it's not its primary purpose in the way it's framed. You, of course, can choose to do something something broader, But I would advise if you were going to contemplate that, you probably couldn't expect it to be done in the time frame that's been suggested, or with possibly even the reviewers that we're talking to currently.
Thank you. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So just following up on Councillor Barley's question on accountability, so that does go to the questions around statements of corporate intent. But just looking ahead to implementation of this review and its findings, I'm assuming the recommendations that are going to come back are operational in nature as opposed to governance. But what is Council's role as shareholder for oversight to make sure that it's being done?
Firstly, actually, I would expect some of the guidance to come out of this to absolutely be about governance, a practice, how management is held to account, and whether there is satisfaction or should be satisfaction at a board level about the systemic nature of health and safety management at the port. That then should give a lead that can feed into statements of intent and such like. More so than detailed operational findings, I might say.
Thank you very much for that. We now come to comments. If there's anybody that wants to make a comment in addition to any questions that might have been asked.
Yeah, I do, Phil.
Okay, Councillor Kathy Casey.
Yeah, thanks. I'll keep it brief. I want to refer to two things that Russell Main said this morning to us. Russell, as you know, is the Secretary of the Auckland Waterfront Branch Local 13 of the Maritime Union. The first thing he said that rung true with me is that workers expect to go to work and return safely home. Amo Kalati went to work at the port and didn't come home. Labum Dyer went to work at the port and didn't come home. They both died at work, at our port, on our watch. Neil Bauer went to work at the port. He returned home eventually with a very broken body. Leslie Gelberger went for an ocean swim. He didn't make it home either. 3 deaths on our watch and 1 broken man at our port. The second thing that Russell said to us this morning, if you recall, was that workers have a right to belong to a union. Now, the Maritime Union of New Zealand has a very long, proud history. It was an amalgamation in 2002 of the New Zealand Waterfront Workers Union and the New Zealand Seafarers Union. For the last 18 years, they've been strong and staunch, representing workers at the port and keeping them safe at work. Thanks, Mayor Goff and colleagues, for this independent review. It's been a long time coming. For me, it signals a new era in our relationship with our port and its workers. It recognises that we, as the governors of Auckland, have a direct responsibility for what happens at the ports of Auckland. It is our port, and I hope this has your unanimous support. Thank you very much again, Mayor Goff.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pipacoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would very much like to speak in support of the independent review happening into health and safety. I think Council, as the majority shareholder, the sole shareholder of the ports, hasn't historically done good by the workers, by the port workers. And the reasons for that go back right to the beginning of the Super City. And I think in some ways we really need to acknowledge that there has been, we have in many ways not been using all of the accountability mechanisms that we have had in our power. And I think it's important to look ahead, and that this is a really important turning point, but at the same time just to acknowledge that, and I think Councillor Casey has really put that into, made that very clear around the personal cost that has occurred at the port. In terms of that accountability, this is a really important part of that looking forward, and the timing of the fact that we were reviewing the statement of corporate intent and looking at including additional health and safety requirements in that statement of corporate intent, and then only a week later, well, it was even less than that, it was 4 days later, we had the fatality, I think really just brought that into very stark reminder of the importance of health and safety and just the terrible tragedy, but also the fact that we had not been keeping our eye on the ball in terms of holding ports management to account in terms of health and safety. And there's many different factors of that, but looking at the statement of corporate intent, we weren't even asking ports to report on their fatalities. So that wasn't even covered in what we were asking them to report back to us in terms of what their actual, what was actually occurring at the ports. And one thing I just wanted to highlight also in terms of supporting this review is when we had the discussion with the ports the other week, and I made this point, but I don't think it really landed, and it's about if you're operating a zero harm workplace, you don't have just tragic accidents. This is a terrible tragedy, but an accident doesn't occur. It's an avoidable incident. And this incident occurred, the most recent one, and I'm sure the review will find, looking back at in terms of the systemic issues and the culture of work and of health and safety, is that it's a multiple factors have to happen, multiple parts of the organisation of the system has got to fail for this kind of catastrophic fatality to occur. It doesn't just happen from one person having an accident. And I think that's what we really need to drive home, and I think this is what this review will show to us in terms of what needs to change to put in place a genuine zero harm workplace that is absolutely focused on health and safety from the board of directors, the whole management, and us as collectively as a council. So I really welcome this review. It's unfortunate that it's had to happen after a fatality, but thank you, Mr. Mayor, that you've really taken this on board and that you've really pushed for it to happen. So thank you for that. I really do support getting behind it, and I hope that we can unanimously agree to the independent review, and I hope that we can land on a reviewer that will really bring the best to this review so that all the stakeholders can feel comfortable that we've got someone that's talking to everybody, because that's been a big issue as well, that MUNs have been kind of marginalised, pushed to one side and haven't really been given the respect that they deserve in terms of being a partner in this conversation. So I think we've got to, I think the terms of reference have got us to a good place in terms of, I look forward to that conversation about who the actual reviewer is going to be. So thank you for that opportunity to do that. So that's it from me, but kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you very much. And Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Kathy Casey has said a lot of what I was planning to say. We have an expectation that when our loved ones head to work, they come home safely to their families. Palamo Kalati, Laboom Dyer, Leslie Gelberger. I want to acknowledge the friends and families and those that have known you. The pain that these people are feeling is something I can't possibly imagine. When there is a workplace accident at the ports, we own that. All of us own that as residents of Auckland who own those ports. I want to thank the Mayor, I want to thank the Maritime Union, and I want to thank councillors for your strong leadership on this issue. I want to encourage the reviewer to work closely with both management and the union so that everybody can work together with the goal of a safe and prosperous port, that's a great place to work, a place that people are proud to work, and that contributes hugely to our city. We don't presuppose the results of this review. It is an independent review. That's clear. But it's clear to the friends and families of those that have lost their lives, to this council, to Auckland residents, that we owe them an explanation. We owe them an independent look into the health and safety of our ports. So I'll be looking at this review very carefully, and I want to zero in on particularly the workplace culture and the culture of health and safety. But I want to point out that this review also is not the end of the matter. It is a jump forward so that we can be clear with the workers at the port and our constituents about the situation at the moment. But I also want to point out that we have a role as shareholder for ongoing examination of health and safety and for other matters as well. I want to quote the statement of corporate intent here. Quote, Ports of Auckland Limited will ensure that the shareholder, that's us as council, is kept fully and promptly informed of any issues that may generate public and/or media interest or comment. I have expressed my disappointment that that is not being followed numerous times, and I expect in the future for that to be given full effect so that we as the representatives of Auckland can monitor these important matters in an ongoing way so that we know it's safe now, we know it's safe in the future. Just want to wrap up by saying I was asked by a reporter recently whether right now the ports are a safe place to work. I didn't know what to say. This review will answer that question for me. This review might call upon us as the shareholder to be decisive and to advocate for action. Evidence is going to guide us on that point. But I want to strongly commend this action. I want to thank the port workers for their support of this review too, for your trust in this review. I want to call upon our colleagues today to confirm this unanimously and send a message for Aucklanders that we care for our own down at the ports. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I'd echo the sentiments of some of the other people who have spoken in terms of your willingness to review health and safety down in the ports. I think that's entirely commendable. The ports of Auckland are, our biggest asset. They employ a lot of Aucklanders. The port's absolutely fundamental to the Auckland economy. So we as councillors, of course, should expect the high standards of health and safety, work practice, efficiency, and everything that goes along with running such a substantial asset. And certainly in the past, like other councillors, I've supported the port on all those grounds. As some of the other councillors have also alluded to, in any review, inevitably of a part of council, whether it's the CCOs or whether it's the ports or whether it's even Auckland Council family, Auckland Council itself, is inevitably a reflection on us too. And I think that after 10 years, this sort of review, although in this case it has a rather more limited focus perhaps than the CCO review, is very welcome. We've gone through a decade with the super city structure, which hasn't really been exposed to any sort of scrutiny at all. And we found that with the CCO review, where there was, a comprehensive list of recommendations that pointed the way to a better future, and which, ironically enough, I suspect was welcomed by the objects of the review, the CCOs themselves, who not only had improvements pointed out to them, but were also in a position to make comments that pointed towards what we should be doing in our role as governors as well. And I'm sure this investigation will no different. It's an investigation that's into health and safety. And I'm assuming, of course, in the modern work environment, health includes mental health too. The health and well-being of workers, whether in the port, whether in administration block, amounts to the same thing. You don't get the best out of people, nor are they able to operate in a safe environment if they're not feeling secure in their own mental well-being. The port is a dangerous place to work. I've worked in the port in years gone by. It is intrinsically a dangerous place. There's big machinery, there's boats, there's delicate balancing exercises. So it's a bit different from other workforces. But that's not by means of explanation. What it does mean is that health standards have to be higher, awareness has to be higher. People have to work together because you're reliant on other people. So I'm absolutely certain that what comes out of this will be beneficial to all concerned, and I think that's important. It's not a witch hunt in the sense of going out after people. For one, I want to know what goes on down there. I want to know what goes on, and if there's practices that are worthy of merit and accolades, then I hope they get highlighted. Equally, if there's practices there that are substandard, then they need to be brought out, because in an environment like that, you can't afford to be going to the lowest common denominator. You want to be to the highest. So, Mr. Mayor, again, I commend you for showing this initiative, just as I commend the relatively constrained timeline here, which will hopefully result in a thorough investigation, a fair investigation, and one in which everyone will be a lot wiser at the end of, and which will point to a better port going forward, because we can't accept anything less. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, officers, for this paper, which I mentioned earlier. I just wanted to echo the sentiments of previous councillors regarding this review. I think for the families, this probably means nothing and is no consolation for their loss. But we hope that it goes some way to helping the port ensure that there is no more loss of life. I really do feel for the families, because they should have every expectation that their loved one is going to come home from working at the port. And I hope that this review will assist in providing a safer workplace for their families. I know that the Ports Companies Act talks about the ports being a successful business, but I don't think anybody around our table wants that to be at the risk of any loss of life. So, I think, it's good we do this review, but again, hopefully it will make a difference. And what else did I want to say? No consolation. And that for the Ports Company, for the Ports of Auckland, I do get a real sense of family amongst them. Tony Gibson, he was acknowledged by Palamo Kalati's family for his support to them. So I really, really, hope that everybody sees this as a way of helping to protect your family at the ports, Tony and the board of Ports of Auckland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, councillors. And briefly in reply, I think everybody here and on the port, and even more so the family and friends of Amo Kalati, felt the tragedy of his loss just a couple of weeks ago. A man with a partner and 7 children. And the fact that while we might not be directly responsible for health and safety on the wharves, we are the sole shareholder, and we do have a responsibility to ensure that proper practices and a proper culture is in place at the ports. So this review to me was really important. I'm hugely pleased that we have got to this point so quickly, and I want to thank officers for their work on this, Bram, and you in particular. And I think that the terms of reference are thorough. I think they cover the ground that needs to be covered, and the appointment of the reviewer will be of a person that meets our Chief Executive's standards in terms of both independence, experience and competency. And that will be really important because there will be a heavy weight on this reviewer in looking at the situation on the wharves and to report back quickly. And I think, as a number of people said, it is important that we get a quick report back, because if there is something systemically wrong with Ports of Auckland, then we want to see that fixed as quickly as possible. The findings and the recommendations of this review will be public, and that's really important. And there'll be clear expectations that the recommendations of this review will be taken seriously by the Board of Ports of Auckland and will be implemented. And then we will have a responsibility in terms of the having the Ports of Auckland in front of us to ensure that they have acted appropriately on what the review has recommended. And that will be really important. We equally will act through our power of co-appointing directors to the Ports of Auckland Board, something that we haven't done in the past, but which changed when the ports were brought back into a direct relationship with the council. I'm also very pleased with the acknowledgement that, and I will circulate to councillors the letter I received this morning from Work Safe New Zealand and Maritime New Zealand, where they commended this council on its leadership, its responsibility, and for its accountability in this regard. So I think we can all be really pleased with that. So I'll put the recommendations A to C this time. I'm reading it off the screen. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried, and I think unanimously, unless somebody records a vote against it. Thank you very much, councillors. We now move on, and thank you very much to Phil and Bram and to Sarah online.